Hello again, and welcome to ManchTalk. I'm Tammy Simmons. I'm your host, and I'm glad you're tuning in. How about that weather out there? It's finally summer. I realize it's only the middle of June, but it seems summer is upon us. And fingers crossed that we have a really good summer because after the last winter and those cold temperatures, we definitely deserve it. I know Dan and I are maybe going to make our way over to the to Hampton Beach because this weekend is the sandcastle competition, so that's always fun to see. And I'm hoping to put our kayak in someplace and spend at least a couple hours on the water this weekend. But on to more pressing matters than the weather or my kayaking schedule. Couple things before I get into the main subject of today's show. I did want to mention I was thinking about Alderman Bain's idea of closing down Elm Street. I don't know if it was actually his idea, but I know he's the one kind of spearheading the discussion of it. I'll tell you, Dan and I were down at Bridge Cafe on, I believe it was Saturday this week, and we sat outside because we had Jenny the Wonder Dog with us, and we were talking to a nice couple who was also eating their lunch there. And one thing that would be nice about having one night or one day a week on the weekend or whatever it is, when the street is closed to traffic, is that you wouldn't be interrupted in your meal by the obnoxious vehicles. There's no reason for a motorcycle to be so loud that you can't hear yourself, the person across the table talking. Dan's a motorcycle owner. I'm not anti-motorcycle by any means. And it's not just motorcycles. There are cars that make way too much noise as well. And the reality is I don't know how we fix it. I mean, do we really want to do we want the police chasing down noisy vehicles, or can people just stop being jerks? I mean, if you drive a motorcycle, that's fine. But, can you not be so disruptive with your tailpipes that people can't even talk to somebody a foot or two away? I mean, is it really necessary for you to have that loud of an exhaust system on your bicycle, on your motorcycle, or on your car? I really don't think it is. It's just absurd. And if closing traffic means that people can enjoy their dinners at XO on Elm or Bridge Cafe or the Cowboy Bar, I can't think of the name of it right now, any of those places with a little less annoyance, that might be a good idea worth considering. That's one complaint I have because, I always have my fill of complaints. The other one is the stupid city drop-off facility. Can I tell you, the city is not responsive to the needs of the residents sometimes. The drop-off facility up on Dunbarton Road is open at the worst times ever. I think it opens at like 7 in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon, Monday through Friday. And then it's only open 2 Saturdays a month. And even then it's only open till either 11:30 or 1:30. It's almost impossible for residents, actual residents, the people paying your taxes, the taxes that pay for the employees in the facility up there, to get there to drop off stuff. Dan and I had a whole bunch of debris that we needed to drop off, and we made it a point on Monday morning before work. We had to get up early so that we could get the trailer over to the drop-off facility, get it dropped off, and hopefully get to work on time because they're only open till 3:30 in the afternoon. It took us over an hour at the drop-off facility between waiting in line because there's so many people there so early in the morning because it's the only time they can go, waiting in line, getting weighed. It took us maybe 10 minutes tops to unload our trailer, but then you have to get in line again and go through the scale again, and it was just absurd. There was probably 10 cars ahead of us when we got there before 8 o'clock in the morning, and there were probably 10 or 15 cars in line when we left. It's just not right. If the city was truly responsive to the needs of the actual residents in the city, they would adjust the hours at the drop-off facility. I contend that we do not need the drop-off facility open 7 to 3:30 Monday through Friday. Maybe we only need it to be open 2 or 3 times during the week, and then all day, 7 to 5 on Saturdays, so that people can actually drop off the stuff that they want to get rid of. We'd have left stuff being picked up by the trash collectors and the yard waste debris people. And on that note, you shouldn't have to pay to drop off yard waste. If the city will pick up yard waste for free, there's no reason why if I drive it there myself, I should have to pay for it. I'm sorry, I don't agree. I think the whole drop-off facility and the rates that they charge and the hours are just wrong. And if somebody wants to actually implement some change and be responsive to city property tax owner payers and residents, they'd make some changes up there. Maybe I'll start a little online petition for that. Anyways, so that wasn't the main subject matter of my show today. What I thought I would talk about is city budgets, because guess what? We're in another budget cycle. And the tax and spending caps in particular. And the reason I want to talk about this today is because it's very confusing for a lot of people, including myself. Now, if you don't know, I was the organizer and coordinator for the petition signatures that got the caps on the ballot in the first place. A lot of work went into that, and the voters in Manchester have voted twice to keep the tax cap on as part of our city charter. Little history. The first time the city voters voted on it was November 2009. We had collected the signatures in 2008, but the alderman then, would not put it on the ballot in 2008. They refused to. We ended up suing, all the stuff. Anyways, it ended up on the ballot in 2009, and it passed the voters in the general election. The Supreme Court ruled the following year that the cap was invalid, and then the following year in 2011, the state legislature, of which I was a part, voted on changing some of the language in the RSAs, which retroactively made any caps that were in place valid again. Then again, later that year in 2011, there was a proposal put forth, if I'm not mistaken, by the Democrats on the board to change the way we calculate the cap. It used to be based on the prior year consumer price index. So if things were good, spending could go up. If things weren't good, spending couldn't go up so much. And the newest version, they take the 3 prior years and average them, which actually in the bigger picture probably makes spending go up slower, which I would like, but I think it kind of hinders when the economy's really good, the city being able to, adapt to that positive scenario in the city. So anyways, that's the history of the cap. So people get confused about what the cap does, what we have. Other communities have different caps. And then on top of what it actually does, it does get twisted because, both sides of the argument are going to skew things or some people will try to skew things to substantiate perhaps their inflated spending habits. So I thought I would try to go over what the language actually says and how that actually impacts the budgets. So there's you can go out to the city website. You can go to manchesternh.gov and go down to city clerk and click on city charter, and you can find the language that's in the charter. It does follow RSAs that you'd have to find at the state website, but generally it's really not that complicated. It's only a page and a half when you print it out, so it's really not that big. And I'm just going to go over a couple things. The first thing, these are the general criteria. In the budget proposals, in submitting the proposed budgets to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, the mayor and school district shall not propose total expenditures, so that's spending, excluding amounts payable in conjunction with municipal bond obligations, so we exempt municipal bond obligations, in an amount exceeding the budget established during the prior fiscal year, excluding amounts payable in conjunction with municipal bond obligations for the prior fiscal year, increased by a factor equal to the average in the changes of the Consumer Price Index urban for the 3 calendar years immediately preceding the adoption of the budget. Now, if there's a decline in CPI, the increase is 0. There's never a negative. There's never a requirement to reduce the budget from the prior year. Now, and the same thing applies to property tax revenues. You can't exceed the property tax revenues raised, excluding property taxes raised for amounts payable in conjunction with municipal bond obligations during the prior fiscal year, increased by a factor equal to the average of the changes of the Consumer Price Index. So basically, spending can only increase the percentage of the average CPI over the past 3 years, and property tax revenues can only increase that same amount. Now, in order to override the cap, you have to have 2/3 vote. The aldermen do have the ability to exempt capital expenditures. So say they had to build a new bridge, they could exempt that. But that would be a separate vote for that specific expenditure. And So basically, you have two things: the amount of money that they spend. So whatever the budget combined of the municipal side and the school budget, and then what they can collect in property tax revenues. Now, this year, the tax and spending caps are limited at 1.63% because that's the number over the average of the 3 years. So that means they shouldn't spend more than 1.63% more than they did last year, and they shouldn't tax us more than 1.63% more than last year. Now, don't use that number and just apply it to your personal tax bill, because it's not your tax bill that can only go up 1.63%. It's the cumulative property taxes that can't exceed 1.63%. And we'll come back to that later. So last year, the city appropriated $336,086,817 for the current budget. It collected $208,145,486 in property taxes. Now you wonder, well, where does the other money come from? The other money comes from state funding, federal education money. There's other monies that come into the city besides just your and my tax bills. So that means if you apply the 1.63%, that this year the city can only spend $5,478,215 more than last year and stay within the cap, which would make our current budget number $341,565,032. It also means that they can only collect $3.4 million more in property taxes than they did last year. Well, this sounds reasonable, right? I mean, we're not saying you can't spend more. We're not saying that, you can't adjust for inflation. The problem, as I've said in the past, is that we make promises in union contracts for salaries that exceed the cap. Our pension costs go up year after year after year, and those exceed the cap. And then our healthcare costs continue to go up. So between those three, if you don't do something about any of those, every year, in order to just maintain the status quo in the city, you're going to have to override the cap, because nobody ever wants to do anything about the salaries, the pensions, and the healthcare costs. So how do we fix that? How do we fix the spending side of things? Well, we have to change the way the government in Manchester does business. And that's not an easy thing to do. One problem that everybody will say is a problem is Yarger-Decker. Yarger-Decker is a system that automatically hands out merit increases to everybody year after year. Yes, automatic merit increases. Doesn't really make them merit increases anymore, but that's what they're going to call. Even back a few years ago when now Mayor Joyce Craig was an alderman, she overrode the tax cap, and she said the reason that she did so, I should say she overrode the spending cap, she did so because of Yarger-Decker. She said Yarger-Decker was broke and we must fix it. Yet Joyce Craig never went on to fix it. Nobody ever goes on to fix it. Nobody ever comes up with a solution to get rid of Yarger-Decker, short of just saying get rid of Yarger-Decker, and put something else in his place so that we have a better system of how we hand out salary increases to the city's employees. So this year, newly elected Alderman John Cataldo, he's actually trying to do something. All too often, the Republicans are labeled as the ones who want to just say no to everything. And John's got a good point. You can't just say no. You have to come up with a solution. And I agree. He ran on supporting the tax cap and also offering solutions. That is a tricky combination of things to achieve. But he is certainly trying. He would like to tie salary increases, to the cap. I think it's a great idea for a couple of reasons. One, I think it makes the stability a little bit more for the employees. I think it's unfair that certain employee groups get in line first and they get the big raises, and then there's no money for the next group. I'd like to see it spread out a little more equally across all of our city employees. Even more important to me, it's more reliable for the taxpayers. If we can tie our salary increases to the cap, we know that we're not going to exceed the cap just based on something we promised in a union contract that we really didn't have the money to pay for down the road. So staying within the rate of inflation for salaries, crazy idea, right? Not really. Now, the second part of the problem, though, is how we deal with new added revenues, new valuations. And this is where people get tripped up quite often. Say Manchester builds 10 new homes. Say, some developer builds 10 brand new homes, say in the North End. And we charge them the same tax value, assessment that the rest of us are paying. So if it's a $300,000 house, brand new house in the North End, they're going to pay the same property taxes as a $300,000 house in Ward 10. So there's new revenues there because those 10 houses now generated in this year new revenues that weren't there last year. But the tax cap doesn't allow for an increase exceeding that 1.63%. So this is where people start to mince words and they say, well, we're going to release the revenue. Well, should we really be releasing the revenue? Should we be taking that extra money that's coming from those valuations, those new added valuations, and just spending it? Or should we be taking that money from those new added valuations and reducing the tax burden on everybody? Now, something to consider is that every time we override the cap in one year, that means spending is increased, which means the next year, the percentage that we're able to increase is on that new amount. So it's got multiple layers. If we override this year, it just makes the 1.63 or whatever the percentage next year that much greater because we've added to the base that we're multiplying. So, personally, I think the new revenues should go back to the taxpayers or go into a rainy day fund. I do not think they should be spent. I think we should manage with the money that we have. I think if we managed last year with the budget that we had, and if we managed in the year prior with the budget that they have, if we increase it by the cost of living, we should be able to manage that as well. Now, one thing I do want to remind people is that there are things that are exempt from the cap. The enterprise funds, which is a whole nother complication. I'm not going to get into explaining them. The expenditures cap does not apply to enterprise fund, which includes the airport, the sewer department, the water department, and the parking department. And it doesn't apply to municipal bond obligations. So if we had to take out a bond to, say, improve Central High School, it doesn't apply to that. So we're just talking about the day in, day out operations of the city, not including the airport, water and sewer, parking, or waterworks. So the money that they collect goes back into those enterprise funds and has nothing to do with the expenditures or the revenue caps. So what to do? We're in that mode where everybody's starting to propose budgets. Now, the mayor proposed a budget within the cap because she's required by the city charter to do so. I don't think anybody realistically expected that whatever the mayor proposed was what would get adopted. It's just what she was obligated to do under the cap. Dan O'Neill supposedly has a budget that he's proposing. I don't know what the numbers are because I've not seen it. I'm only a measly taxpayer. Why would I know these things? And I understand that there's an alternative to that as well. So there's an aldermanic meeting tonight. Today is Tuesday the 12th. There is an aldermanic meeting tonight, and I do believe that they'll be voting on this. Unfortunately, I think it's not helpful to the taxpayers in the city to not be able to see the proposed budgets prior to the meetings. I have no way to chime in and pass an informed opinion on to my alderman or maybe one of the aldermen at large if I have no idea what they're voting on. The only thing I probably know at this point is what the mayor's budget was. And she's just obligated under the charter to stay within the cap. So I think the way we do this, and we keep it so secretive, and we don't publicize what the numbers that different entities are looking for, and then expect the aldermen at the same meeting to vote on those things, and then hold those aldermen accountable. I think it's a bad plan. I know John Cataldo would like to see some changes, as I mentioned. I also know that John Cataldo's probably getting pressured by Dan O'Neill to, make a deal and do something so that he will override the cap. And if I had to bet money, because I've been in politics for long enough, I bet that all sorts of promises are being made behind closed doors to different aldermen And quite honestly, I wish more aldermen would remember who put them there and why they're there. If you ran to support the tax cap, I would ask that you support the tax cap. If you didn't, then obviously I can't ask you to support something that, to be held accountable for something that you didn't promise people. I think we have an opportunity in this particular Board of Mayor and Aldermen with so many new, younger, forward-thinking aldermen to make some serious change in the way Manchester does business. I think Tim Baines is an asset. I think Will Stewart's an asset. I think John Cataldo and Elizabeth Moreau are assets. I would hope that neither side of the political spectrum is applying undue pressure to any of the aldermen to do anything other than what they feel is right and to vote their conscience. I think it'll be interesting to see the way that how this plays out. But as I said, I wanted people to understand the cap a little bit better. Revenue, when people say they're releasing the revenue, that means it's fine to release the revenue, but are you spending it as well? The spending is where I'm really concerned about. If we can curtail spending, the revenues will be fine on their own. If we're just going to override the revenue side so that there's more money to spend later, I don't think that's the way to go. I think growing at the rate of inflation, the same way most of us grow our families' budgets at the rate of inflation, is sufficient for the city as well. That's what the tax and spending cap was all about. Expecting the city government to live within its means, the same way your family and my family are expected to live within our means. So that's what my opinions on the budget. And it'll be interesting to see what I have to say next week. So they're in the middle of state rep and county positions and state senator filing period. There's some great people running for office so far in Manchester. I know Representatives McLean and Freeman and Sullivan and Gagney are all running again to keep their seats in Concord, representing the good people of Manchester. Myself and Dan Garthwaite filed last Wednesday morning, first thing. I'm looking to take back my seat up at the State House, as well our former aldermen Mark Warden, Ross Terrio, Joe LaChance, Dick Marston. So there's some prior reps that are looking to get back up there. And there's some great new people as well. Ward 1 has I think his name's Andrew Frometh. That's a refreshing change, younger person there. There's a couple good. Patrick Sweeney over in Ward 12. There's some great young faces bubbling up on the Republican side of things to try to, best represent the people of Manchester. So by the time I tape my show next week, we'll know who's running on both sides of the ballot, and I'm sure I'll be talking about that more. There's not much specifically coming up as in the way of events, but I do want to remind people that in town Manchester's community farmers market starts Thursday the 21st. That's now going to be located in Stanton Plaza, which is right directly in front of I think it's a Doubletree by Hilton now, the center of New Hampshire, what was the Radisson, what was the Holiday Inn, and directly across from Veterans Park. So that's where the farmers market's going to be now. That runs every Thursday, 3 to 6:30 in the afternoon. Great place to go and take a walk. It's right there on Elm Street. You can walk down, maybe go play a game at Boards and Brews, stop over to Bridge Cafe and have a delicious sandwich or a great smoothie, all sorts of things. Go Lala's, have some great dessert. And then go to the farmer's market. You can get more information on that and other things happening downtown at intownmanchester.com. And a reminder that on Saturday, July 28th, the Manchester Brewfest in Arms Park, it benefits New Horizon. You can get more information on that at manchesterbrewfest.com. And that's, again, on Saturday, July 28th. Great event for a great cause. Next week on the 20th, the Manchester GOP will have their monthly meeting at Murphy's Tap Room on Wednesday, the 20th at 6 p.m. We'd love to see some fresh new faces come in and talk about how we get people elected here in Manchester and what we can do to help our community. You can email me if you have any questions on the tax cap or the budget cap or whichever cap you want to talk about, or about any events I've mentioned or the Manchester GOP or, ideas for future shows, whatever you got, you can email me at manchtalk@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Facebook at ManchTalk or on Twitter. Although I admit that I've stopped tweeting because I'm kind of learning that Twitter's becoming maybe a little evil in their society. That's all I have for this week. I hope you get out there this weekend. Maybe get over to Hampton and check out the sandcastle sculptures. Or if not, just get out and walk on the bike path, or go up to Doors Pond and walk around there, or Nut Pond, or any one of the great spaces we have right here in Manchester. Until next week, that's all I got. Have a great weekend. Bye.